First book of Kings, chapters 14 and 15 today, and I'm not going to lie, this is going to get weird and complicated, so we'll be doing very well to get through this, being clear on who is who and what they have done. It opens anyway with King Jeroboam, who is king of 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. His son has fallen ill, and Jeroboam decides that the answer to this is to get his wife dressed up in disguise and send her to the prophet who told him that he was going to be king of these 11 tribes to find out from him what's going to happen to their son. Somewhat inconveniently, the name of this prophet is Ahijah, and the name of their son is Abijah. I kind of think that's almost evidence that this story is true, because if you were making this story up, you'd have to be a monumental muppet to have two of the key characters, in this section of the story at least, with names that similar. Ahijah the prophet is said to be blind from old age anyway, but God gives him a heads up that it's the wife of Jeroboam coming in disguise. Inconveniently, the wife of Jeroboam doesn't have a name, so we're going to have to refer to her as wife of Jeroboam. And God also tells Ahijah what he is to say to her. It is Ahijah's unpleasant duty to have to point out that perhaps what should have been obvious to Jeroboam's wife, that God is rather angry with him for being a terrible king, and that disaster is coming on the family of Jeroboam, in that when they all die, anyone who dies in the streets of the city is said they're going to be eaten by dogs. This seems to be a particularly big deal, how your body is treated after death at that point. I'm not sure. And if they die in the countryside, they're going to be eaten by birds. It's further added that Jeroboam's son is going to die upon return of his mother to the house, and that the Israelites are going to be driven from the land they're currently occupying, and it's basically just the whole thing is about to become a total disaster, all because of this worshipping of fake gods and all the rest of it. Jeroboam's wife anyway does return home because she's clearly a terrible mother, and upon entering her house promptly, as said, the son drops dead. I suppose this is just about an argument that she might not believe that, but she made the effort to go and see this guy, so yeah, I'm calling it terrible mother. And then it all starts to kick off with things coming undone for Jeroboam. So we have Jeroboam ruling for 22 years, and then his son Nadab succeeds him. This is not the same Nadab who was barbecued back in Leviticus, albeit things don't go particularly well for this Nadab as he rules for a very short period. Then some guy called Baasha, B-A-A, Baasha, I suppose, comes on and kills him and wipes out the entirety of Jeroboam's family, such that they can then be eaten in the street by dogs and birds in the thing. But Baasha turns out to be a terrible king as well, so we've had God's prophecy fulfilled by another terrible king for some reason. Going back to Rehoboam anyway, who is the descendant of David and is king of the one tribe, just the tribe of Judah. He's a terrible king as well, obviously. He then dies and is succeeded by his son, who is called Abijah, as in the same name as Jeroboam's son, who was killed by God. It's very confusing. But shortly before Rehoboam dies and is succeeded by his son Abijah, the Egyptians invade and raid the temple and steal all the treasures from the temple. But no mention is made of the Ark of the Covenant, which surely should have been in the temple. But maybe this potentially accounts for why we don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is anymore, because it sounds like it got nicked, but it doesn't state that it got nicked. Abijah, the son of Rehoboam anyway, not Abijah, the son of Jeroboam, because he's dead. Hope you're keeping up with this. He rules as king for a while and is another terrible, terrible king. He rules for a little while, and then his son Asa, A-S-A, takes over, and he is finally, we have a good king and rules for 41 years. So hooray for Asa. Is that out of 6 kings, I think? One of them has been any good. It's a little bit alarming. It's not clear if Asa is a non-sinning king, more like Solomon, who seemed unsinning until the end, but it does note that he's very devoted to God, as David was. So it seems devotion, again, that key theme, is seeming like an important part of the equation. So for the short version of this, I put together a little visual aid. I appreciate you're all used to seeing wonderful, exotic YouTube things. I did this, it took me 45 minutes on PowerPoint all by myself. It's not quite right in terms of there are some other kings that come after this, but for the purposes of trying to understand what's going on here, this is where we stand. So we have King David, as you can see at the top. He's king over all the 12 tribes of Israel, the whole thing in one go. This is important because we've had the prophecy that leads to something that sounds a lot like Jesus in 1,000 years' time. So King David's line has to be intact all the way down that. When David died, his son Solomon took over. He was also king of 12 tribes of Israel, the whole thing again intact. Solomon, of course, went off the rails towards the end. So Israel then split, and we then have Jeroboam, who is not a descendant of David, takes over 11 tribes, and Rehoboam, who is a descendant of David, looking after the tribe of Judah. So the David line just goes down to Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, and then there's another guy called Jehoshaphat. Don't know if I'm saying that right. Showing either way that we have the full line of David, and that's basically the short version of that bit, believe it or not. And then we have Jeroboam succeeded by his son Nadab, who's another terrible king, and then Baasha, who comes along and kills him and all of Jeroboam's family, and is another terrible, terrible king. Does that make that clear? I'm not sure. I half did it so I could work out for myself what on earth all that was going on. Very complicated. In terms of the interesting points to pull out of that, again, we have this idea of all these terrible, terrible kings. At this stage, I don't know if Jehoshaphat is a terrible king or not, but even if you exclude him, out of all those other ones, Asa is the only decent one. The rest are all terrible, terrible people. And then we have Baasha, who is basically delivering God's verdict by killing all of Jeroboam's family. So delivering on that prophecy, as it were. But then he's a terrible king. So God has used a terrible person to be a terrible king to fulfill a prophecy. And think, why is that necessary? I don't really understand that. We also have reference here to all these kings dying. It talks about them being gathered to their people or resting with their ancestors. I sort of thought previously where we'd seen that was a reference to they'd gone to some sort of heaven without explicitly stating what that heaven was. But these are all terrible people. There's no way if there's a heaven, they're going to it. So surely it would imply, therefore, that gathered to your people or wherever, it doesn't make a reference to where you went after you died, assuming that's a thing. It would seem it only refers to the fact that you've died. So, yeah, it doesn't really have as much information as I sort of thought, maybe. We'll see. Anyway, the obvious question from here is Jehoshaphat. Is he a total punk or not? Don't know. We will go on in the next video. We will try and find out.